The land stretched wide and merciless beneath the scorching sun, where the horizon shimmered like a forge and the air was heavy with the smell of dust and horse sweat. Out here in the western frontier, a man's wealth wasn't measured by coin or gold. It was measured in cattle, land, water rights, and the grit in his soul to keep them. Elias McCord had grit. What he didn't have anymore was money. He had poured every last dollar, every last nugget of silver, into buying a piece of land 3 days' ride west of Dodge. Folks in town had muttered behind his back when he signed the papers. Some said he was a fool. Others whispered that land was cursed, that it had a history of bad blood, strange deaths, and broken men. But Elias wasn't one to pay mind to ghosts or gossip. He was 33, broad-shouldered from a life under the sun, with a rifle scar running down his left arm and a stubborn streak that had gotten him through war, famine, and rustlers. The ranch he bought wasn't much to look at. 300 acres of dry grass, a leaning barn, and a clapboard house so worn it looked like a stiff wind could topple it. But Elias had seen worse places turn to promise. "This'll do," he'd told himself as he tied his horse, Boone, to the porch rail and walked across the groaning boards. This'll do. But it wasn't until nightfall, when he pushed open the barn doors, that he realized he hadn't just bought land. He had bought a nightmare. The lantern flickered in his hand, casting long shadows across rafters lined with cobwebs. Dust rose like spirits from the earth floor with every step he took. At first, Elias thought it was a trick of the light. Something dangling from the center beam of the barn, swaying gently as if stirred by a breath of wind. When the light hit it fully, his jaw tightened. It was a girl. A giant of a girl, near 7 feet tall if she'd been standing. Her bare feet dangled inches from the ground, her body slack, her head tilted at an unnatural angle where the noose bit into her neck. Her skin was pale in the lantern glow, her hair a tangled river of chestnut falling down her shoulders. Someone had left her hanging there, abandoned like a scarecrow no longer useful. A wooden sign had been nailed above her head. The words scrawled in crude red paint dripped like blood, "W.H. Manslaughter. Elias's hand clenched around the lantern. He had seen death before, the kind dealt by bullets, knives, or fever. But this was cruelty meant to be read, meant to send a message. He lowered the lantern, his throat dry. Lord have mercy. Something in her face stopped him from turning away. Even in death, there was a strange dignity in her features, as if she'd stood against the world and gone down fighting. Elias set the lantern on a crate and reached for his knife. The rope was coarse, stiff with age, but it gave under the steel. He lowered her heavy frame down carefully, laying her on the barn floor. His mind churned. Who was she? Why here? Why like this? That night, Elias barely slept. The prairie wind howled against the shutters, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, towering, solemn, bound by rope and injustice. By dawn, he had made his decision. She wouldn't be left nameless. She wouldn't be left to rot in his barn. He'd give her a grave and maybe, in time, answers. 2 days later, Elias rode into Dodge. The town was alive with the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the clatter of wagon wheels, and the raucous shouts spilling from the saloon. Men in dust, coated hats leaned on railings, spit tobacco and eyed strangers with suspicion. Elias tied Boone outside the sheriff's office. Sheriff Amos Caldwell was a thick-set man with a gut straining against his vest, but his eyes were sharp as a hawk's. He glanced up from paperwork when Elias stepped inside. "McCord," Amos said, tipping his hat. "Heard you bought the old Haskell place. Can't say I'd have wagered on you making a go of it there." "I didn't come for talk of wagers," Elias replied. His voice was low, deliberate. "I came with a body." The sheriff frowned. "What kind of body?" "A girl. Hung in my barn." That sobered the room. A deputy, young and wary, stopped fiddling with a deck of cards. Amos leaned back in his chair, chewing his mustache. "Describe her." Elias hesitated. The words felt strange even as he said them. "Tall, too tall for any woman I've seen, near 7 feet. Broad-built, strong." She looked different. The sheriff's brows knit. "Different how?" "She weren't white," Elias said flatly. "Didn't look Injun neither. Not in the way we know, but there was something other about her." "I found a sign with her. Said, 'White man's law takes all.'" The room went quiet as a churchyard. The deputy spat in the spittoon. That's bad business, real bad. Amos finally spoke. You listen to me, McCord. You don't want to be mixed up in this. Some things out here best left buried. You take that girl, put her in the ground quiet, and forget she ever lived. Do you understand me? Elias stared hard at the lawman. No, I don't. Their eyes locked across the desk, the air heavy with tension. Amos was the law, but Elias had never been a man to bow easy. Finally, the sheriff sighed. Suit yourself, but don't say I didn't warn you. There's men in these parts, powerful men, who wouldn't take kindly to you sniffin' after something that ain't your concern. Elias left Dodge with more questions than answers. That night, back on the ranch, he dreamed. The girl stood tall in the dream, alive, eyes burning like fire. She wasn't silent. She spoke in a language Elias didn't know, but somehow understood. Her voice rolled like thunder across the plains. You bought land stained in blood. You bought me. Now you carry my fight. He woke with a start, sweat soaking his shirt. The wind rattled the window. The night was deep and endless. And Elias McCord knew one thing for certain. His troubles were only beginning. The morning sun blazed across the plains like a cruel overseer, burning away the night's chill and flooding Elias's ranch with light. Dust swirled in golden motes as Boone stamped impatiently near the corral, nostrils flaring as if sensing trouble. Trouble was indeed coming. Elias leaned on the fence post, hat brim low against the sun. He hadn't slept since the dream. The girl's thunderous words lingered in his skull like the echo of a church bell. You bought me. Now you carry my fight. A sane man might have shaken it off, might have poured whiskey, saddled up, and rode away from cursed land and dead girls. But Elias McCord wasn't a man built for running. He was built for planting his boots in the dirt and daring the storm to move him. That's when he saw them, dark shapes on the horizon. Riders. The arrival 5 men rode in hard, their horses kicking up a long trail of dust. They came like shadows, wide-brimmed hats pulled low, rifles glinting. Outlaws, every one of them. You could tell by the slouch in their saddles, the bandanas around their necks, the way they scanned the ranch like wolves circling prey. Their leader rode at the front, a towering figure with a scar bisecting his cheek and cold gray eyes that glittered with meanness. His name was Bart Crowder, and Elias had heard of him in whispers at the saloon. Gunman, rustler, killer. Crowder commanded a gang that had left more than one sheriff face down in the dust. The riders pulled up in front of the ranch house. Elias didn't move, his Winchester resting against the fence rail within reach. McCord. Crowder's voice was gravel dragged across steel. You bought land that don't belong to you. Elias spat into the dust. Paper says different. Crowder's grin was all teeth, no warmth. Paper don't mean nothing out here. That land was promised to us, and you got something else in your barn, something you best hand over. Elias's heart ticked hard. So they knew about the girl. I buried her, he said flatly. Crowder's smile faded. You should have left her hanging. Now you stirred up business you don't understand. The outlaw leaned forward in the saddle, eyes glinting. We'll be back come noon tomorrow. You'll either ride out and leave this place behind, or you'll be buried alongside that freak of a girl. You hear me, rancher? Elias didn't flinch. I hear you. Crowder spat, yanked his reins, and rode off, his men trailing like jackals. Dust swallowed them whole, but their threat lingered like a coiled rattlesnake in Elias's chest. The saloon and the truth that night, Elias rode into Dodge again. He needed answers, and there was only one place men talked too much, the Silver Spur Saloon. The air inside was thick with smoke and spilled whiskey, the piano banging out a crook tune while women with painted faces laughed too loud. Elias pushed through, his boots heavy on the warped floorboards. He found Sheriff Amos at a back table nursing a drink. You knew, Elias said, slamming his hand down. The table rattled, whiskey sloshing. You knew about her. Amos's eyes hardened. Keep your voice down, McCord. You don't know what you're dabbling in. Then tell me. The sheriff sighed, rubbed his face. Finally, he leaned forward. She weren't no ordinary girl. Folks said she came from a line older than this frontier itself. Some called giants, others called throwbacks of the old world, a tribally different from any Apache or Shokes. Strong, tall, near superhuman, and dangerous if riled. Elias frowned. And Crowder and his gang were hired once, by ranchers, railmen, even judges, to wipe 'em out, said they wouldn't bow to white man's law, wouldn't sell their land or their water. Most were slaughtered. Some were sold. That one you found must have been the last. Elias's jaw tightened, and they hung her in my barn like a warning. Amos nodded grimly, a reminder of who runs this territory. And Crowder won't stop till you're gone. You stir up her memory. You stir up a war. Elias stood tall. Then maybe it's time there was a war. The sheriff shook his head. You'll die, McCord. Better than livin', a coward. High noon, the sun climbed mercilessly, hanging in the sky like a fiery judge. Elias stood in the dirt outside his ranch house, Winchester in hand, his hat pulled low. Boone was tied at the rail, snorting nervously. In the distance, dust plumed again, riders coming fast, Crowder and his 5 men. Guns gleamed at their sides, faces set for blood. Elias planted his boots firm. They pulled up, horses blowing steam, guns already half drawn. Crowder grinned. Last chance, rancher. Walk away. Elias's voice was steady. Not today. The air cracked. Elias's Winchester roared, dropping the first outlaw clean out of the saddle. Chaos erupted. Gunfire splitting the silence, horses screaming, men shouting. Elias ducked behind the coral fence, firing deliberate, precise shots. Another outlaw tumbled, clutching his chest. But they were many and Elias was one. Bullets chewed the wood around him, one grazing his arm. Blood seeped warm down his sleeve. Crowder dismounted, striding forward with revolvers in each hand, eyes blazing murder. You're finished, McCord. Elias's breath came hard, sweat and blood stinging his skin. He chambered his last round. Then it happened. The ground seemed to tremble. Crowder stopped mid-stride, eyes wide. Behind Elias near the barn, a figure moved. A shadow too tall, too broad. The girl, alive. She stepped into the sun, towering, rope burned still raw around her neck, but her chest rising, her eyes aflame with fury. She wasn't dead. She had never been dead. Elias's jaw slackened, but instinct drove him. He fired his last shot, straight into Crowder's chest. The outlaw leader staggered, dropped his guns, and fell into the dust with a thud that shook the earth. His men froze, terror-stricken, staring at the giant girl like they'd seen a ghost. Then, panicked, they wheeled their horses and fled into the horizon. Silence fell. The girl turned her burning eyes on Elias. For a moment neither spoke. The wind whistled through the dry grass, carrying the smell of gunpowder and blood. Finally, her voice rolled low and strong. You chose to fight. Now you are bound to me. Elias, bleeding but unbowed, met her gaze. Then let's finish what was started. Epilogue weeks later. The name Elias McCord carried across the frontier. Some said he'd killed Crowder and his whole gang with nothing but his Winchester and grit. Others swore he was protected by a spirit, woman, a giantess risen from the dead. The truth lay on that lonely ranch, where Elias and the girl, her name lost to history, stood side by side, rebuilding. He tended the land, she stood watch, tall as the horizon, unbroken, a reminder that some things on the frontier could never be conquered by greed or law. The West rolled on, dusty trails, outlaws, sheriffs, and saloons. But on that stretch of cursed land, justice had taken root, and Elias McCord, the rancher who spent his fortune buying a farm and found a giant girl hanged inside, lived on in whispered legend,